In the scriptural justice system, the highest authority, the Most High Yah, is the judge and the jury. The seed of Israel are his children. These are their stories. The wall is covered with a massive map of the Atlantic Ocean. Red lines trace routes from West Africa to the Americas, hundreds of them. Each line representing countless ships, countless lives. Banks stands before it, marker in hand. The team assembled, silent. Banks, Deuteronomy 28:68. We've been building to this verse for 5 episodes. She writes it in large letters on the board. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Written approximately 1400 BCE, 3,000 years before it happened. Every single word came true. She circles key words: Egypt, ship sold, bondmen, bondwomen, no man shall buy you. Banks prove it, word by word, with documentation. Riley projects a timeline on the screen. 1441, Portuguese begin capturing Africans. 1502, first enslaved Africans sent to Americas. 1619, first Africans arrive in Virginia. 1808, U.S. bans international slave trade, continues illegally. 1865, 13th Amendment ends legal slavery in U.S. 1888, Brazil, last country to abolish slavery, Riley. The transatlantic slave trade, 4 centuries. 12 to 15 million Africans forcibly transported. That's the conservative estimate. Chen, some scholars say it could be as high as 20 million. And that's just the ones who survived the voyage. For every person who made it across, an estimated 2 to 3 died during capture, the march to the coast, or the Middle Passage, Okafor, which means the total number of Africans killed or displaced could be 30 to 60 million. Silence. Banks. Now, let's connect it to Deuteronomy. First word, Egypt. She writes on the board. Banks. Egypt in biblical terminology doesn't just mean the geographic location, it means Mitzrayim, the house of bondage, the place of slavery, the place they escaped from under Moses. Okafor, it's symbolic. Egypt equals captivity. Right. So when Deuteronomy says they'll return to Egypt, it means they'll return to a state of bondage. A new slavery. Worse than before. Riley and the Americas became exactly that. A new Egypt, a new house of bondage, Banks. Second word, ships. She circles it. Specific, not walking, not by land, by ships. How did the Hebrews leave Egypt the first time? Chen, foot, through the Red Sea. Exactly. Exodus on foot. But Deuteronomy 28:68 says the return would be different. By the way, thou shalt see it no more again. They wouldn't walk back. They'd be taken by ships, across water, never to see their homeland again. She pulls up images of slave ships, the horrific cross-sections showing human beings packed like cargo. Banks, the Middle Passage. That's the fulfillment. Riley works with digitized slave ship manifests. Hundreds of them. Riley, I've compiled records from over 36,000 documented slave voyages. The Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, Emory University. He pulls up a ship manifest from 1752. Ship Brooks, origin Bonny, West Africa. Destination Charleston, South Carolina. Cargo 451 enslaved Africans. Deaths en route 127. Another ship Henrietta Marie. Origin Calabar Coast. Destination Jamaica. Cargo 200 enslaved Africans. Deaths en route 74. Riley. Every ship, every voyage. Documented. They kept meticulous records because these were property, inventory. Human beings reduced to cargo manifests. Riley, not even human in the records. Look at this. He shows an insurance document from 1781. Cargo of Negroes insured against loss by storm, rebellion or spoilage. Payment upon delivery of live goods. Spoilage. They called dead enslaved people spoilage. In SA Altered Research Lab Day, Okafor stands before a projection showing the origins of enslaved Africans. Okafor. Here's where it gets specific. Not all regions of Africa were targeted equally. She highlights the map. Primary slave raid regions. Senegambia, Sierra Leone, Gold Coast, Ghana, Bight of Benin, Bight of Biafra, Igbo territories, West Central Africa, Congo, Angola. Now, remember the Hebrew communities we documented in episode 4? She overlays the Hebrew community map onto the slave trade map. They match almost perfectly. The Igbo territories, where we documented Hebrew practices, eighth-day circumcision, Sabbath-keeping. That's the bite of Biafra, one of the largest sources of enslaved people. How many Igbo were enslaved? Estimated 1.5 to 2 million over the course of the trade. That's nearly an entire people group. Okafor, it was systematic. Slave traders knew the Igbo territories were populated and organized. They specifically targeted them. She pulls up colonial records from British traders. The Igbo make excellent slaves once broken. They are intelligent, which makes them rebellious initially, but with proper discipline they become valuable workers. Banks, once broken, they had to destroy their spirit. And their identity. Look at this. She shows plantation rules from South Carolina, 1740. It is forbidden for slaves to speak their native tongues, to practice heathen customs, to keep their day of rest on any day but Sunday, or to gather in groups larger than 3 without white supervision. Chen, they criminalized Hebrew practices. Okafor, without even knowing that's what they were. Plantation owners just knew these particular slaves were difficult. They kept trying to observe Saturday instead of Sunday. They refused pork. They tried to maintain their identity. Banks, so they beat it out of them. Banks presents to the team with Dr. Margaret Whitfield, 50s historian specializing in American slavery, visibly uncomfortable. Banks, Dr. Whitfield, you're considered the leading expert on plantation culture in the antebellum South. Whitfield, I've done extensive research, yes. Banks, tell me about slave rebellions. There were numerous uprisings, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Stono Rebellion. Which ethnic groups were most likely to rebel? Pause. That's difficult to quantify. Is it? Plantation owners kept records. They noted which African ethnic groups were docile versus rebellious. What did they say about the Igbo? The Igbo were noted as being more resistant to enslavement. More resistant. Why? Whitfield. Various theories. They had organized societies in Africa, systems of law and governance, banks. They had a covenant, a law from their God, and they tried to keep it even in chains. I don't think we can make religious assumptions. It's not assumption, it's documented. Pull up the WPA slave narratives again, Riley. Riley projects testimony from formerly enslaved Igbo descendants. My grandpappy say he Igbo, say Igbo people keep de law. Won't bow to no man but de Almighty. Old folks wouldn't eat pork, got whipped for it but wouldn't eat it, say it was forbidden. Granny kept Saturday, call it the true Sabbath. Master tried to break her, she never did break. Banks, they remembered. Even after generations, even after the language was beaten out of them. They remembered they were different, they remembered they had laws. The historical record does show the Igbo had lower survival rates. They committed suicide at higher rates than other groups. Riley Igbo Landing, 1803, Georgia. He pulls up the historical account. A group of Igbo captives, upon arrival in Savannah, overpowered their captors and marched into the water, drowning themselves rather than submit to slavery. Witnesses reported they were singing and chanting in their language. Okafor. They chose death over bondage, because bondage was a violation of who they were. Banks. They were Hebrew. And Hebrew people were never meant to be enslaved permanently. Leviticus 25. Even if a Hebrew became a servant, they were to be freed in the 7th year. It was against their law to be enslaved forever. Whitfield, you're saying the Igbo who committed suicide at Igbo Landing were Hebrews? Banks, I'm saying they were descendants of Hebrews who had lived in Africa for over 1,000 years, and when faced with permanent slavery, something their covenant explicitly forbade, they chose death. Silence. The team reviews more evidence. Chen finds something. Chen, look at this. Auction advertisements from Charleston, 1760s. He reads, fresh cargo of Negroes from the Calabar coast. These are of superior quality, educated in their heathen ways, some literate in strange script, suitable for household service or skilled labor, will be sold separately to prevent combination and rebellion. Riley, literate in strange script. Hebrew script? Had to be. What other script would West Africans know? Okafor, some Igbo elders maintained Hebrew literacy well into the 1700s. Colonial records mention it. The British called them the writing people. Banks, and when they got to America that was stripped away. They were forbidden to read or write. any language. She pulls up slave codes from Virginia 1740. It shall be unlawful to teach any slave to read or write. Penalty, fine and imprisonment. Banks. They couldn't risk literate slaves. Couldn't risk them reading the Bible for themselves. Because if they did, they'd read Deuteronomy 28. They'd recognize themselves. Exactly. They'd know they weren't just random Africans. They'd know they were the covenant people under judgment. And they'd know judgment has an expiration date. SALT, Research Lab Night. Riley works alone, pulling up more manifests. He finds a pattern. Riley! Banks! You need to see this. Banks rushes in. Riley shows a series of ship manifests, 1720 to 1780, all from the same region, Bight of Biafra. Look at the destinations. Not random, they're clustering them. Destination patterns, Virginia. 23% from Bight of Biafra. 31% from Bight of Biafra, Georgia. 28% from Bight of Biafra. Banks, the American South. That's where most Igbo ended up. Riley, which means that's where most Hebrew descendants ended up. The people who became African Americans in the South, statistically a huge percentage have Igbo ancestry. Banks and Igbo are the group with the strongest Hebrew cultural markers. Banks, if this is true, if even 30% of enslaved Africans in America were Igbo, and Igbo are descended from Hebrews, Banks, then millions of African Americans are literally the children of Israel, scattered, enslaved, just like Deuteronomy predicted. They stand in silence, the weight of it crushing. Banks presents the third key word from Deuteronomy 28:68. Banks, sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen. She pulls up auction block photographs. Brutal, dehumanizing. Banks. They weren't just enslaved, they were sold, commodified, auctioned, Okafor like livestock. Worse, livestock had value. These were human beings whose humanity was legally erased. She shows the Dred Scott decision, 1857. A Negro whose ancestors were imported into this country and sold as slaves could not be a citizen of the United States. The Supreme Court said it explicitly. Descendants of enslaved Africans were not citizens, not fully human under law. Chen sold unto your enemies. Who were the enemies? Banks. The nations that enslaved them. Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, the Netherlands, and eventually America. She writes on the board, your enemies. Portugal, Spain, France, Catholic, Britain, Protestant, America, Protestant, Netherlands, Christian nations, all of them. Claiming to follow the God of Abraham while enslaving the actual children of Abraham. Riley. The irony is devastating. Okafor, it's not irony, it's prophecy. They were sold to their enemies, nations that claimed the Hebrew God but didn't recognize the Hebrew people. Interrogation room. Day Banks sits across from Reverend Thomas Morrison, 70s, white, Southern Baptist, defensive. Banks, Reverend Morrison, your church was founded in 1845 in South Carolina. Morrison, yes, we're proud of our heritage. Your church was founded specifically to defend slavery. The Southern Baptist Convention split from Northern Baptists over the slavery issue. Morrison, that's a complicated history. Banks, not complicated, documented. Your founding documents explicitly defend slavery as biblically ordained. Yes or no? Long pause. Yes. Banks, what Bible verses did they use? Ephesians 6:5, slaves obey your earthly masters. Colossians 3:22, did they ever quote Deuteronomy 28? I don't know. Banks, they didn't. Because if they had, they'd have to admit that the enslaved people were the biblical Hebrews under judgment, and that would have complicated the narrative. We've since apologized for our history with slavery. In 1995, 130 years late, but you never told your congregants the full truth, did you? What truth? That the people your church defended enslaving were the actual covenant people. The children of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. That's who was picking your cotton. That's who was being sold on auction blocks. That's not possible. Banks, it's not only possible, it's documented, and your church and churches like it buried the evidence for 2 centuries. The team works late, exhausted, haunted. Chen, there's one more part of verse 68 we haven't addressed. No man shall buy you. Chen, what does that mean? They were bought. Millions of them. Not buy as in purchase. The Hebrew word is kana. It can mean purchase, but it also means redeem, as in buy back, rescue. Banks, kinsman redeemer, like Boaz redeeming Ruth. Someone from your family who buys you out of trouble. Riley. So no man shall buy you means no one will come to redeem you, no rescuer. If no nation came to rescue them, no army, no kinsman, they were abandoned. For 400 years, 1502 to 1865, no one came. She walks to the board, writes, Deuteronomy 28:68 fulfilled, Egypt bondage, American slavery equals new house of bondage. Ships, Middle Passage, documented 36,000 plus voyages. Sold, auction blocks, property records, manifests, bondmen and bondwomen, legal enslavement, both sexes. No man shall buy redeem you, no nation rescued them. Banks. Every word. Exact fulfillment. Chen. So what does this mean for today, for their descendants? Banks, it means we've identified them, the Hebrew people, scattered and lost. They're not in Europe, they're not in modern Israel, they're in America, the Caribbean, Brazil, descendants of those who came on the ships. African Americans, Banks, the so-called African Americans, the ones everyone called just slaves. They're the tribes. Silence. Okafor, and nobody knows. They're starting to remember. That's what the awakening is. People reading their Bibles, seeing Deuteronomy 28, and recognizing their own history. What happens when millions of people wake up to this? Everything changes. Identity changes. Power structures shift. Reparations conversations take on biblical dimensions. She looks at the timeline, at the ships, at the 400 years of bondage. We document what happened after the ships, the curses that continued. Jim Crow, prison, family separation, all of it prophesied. Riley, it didn't end with emancipation. Banks, no, the curses don't end until the judgment period ends, and we need to show that the suffering continued exactly as Deuteronomy predicted. Banks stands alone. Chen finds her. You okay? Banks. My ancestors came on those ships, probably from Igbo territories, probably keeping Saturday Sabbath, probably refusing pork, and they were beaten until they forgot. But you remember now. Yeah, I remember, and I can't unknow it. She turns to him. When this gets out, and it will, people are going to fight it, violently, because if African Americans are the biblical Hebrews, then the entire social order is based on a lie. That's why we have to document everything, make it bulletproof. Between 1502 and 1866, approximately 12.5 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic Ocean in the transatlantic slave trade. Nearly 2 million died during the Middle Passage. The largest source regions included the Bight of Biafra, Igbo territories, where Hebrew cultural practices were documented by colonial observers. Deuteronomy 28:68, And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. This prophecy was written approximately 3,000 years before the transatlantic slave trade began. Every detail was fulfilled. Welcome to Yah and Order.